iDS Talks is a podcast dedicated to helping corporations and law firms find new and effective ways to leverage data, giving them a decisive advantage both in and out of the courtroom.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of iDS Talks. My name is Jonathan Sachs, Chief Revenue Officer at iDS, and I'm joined today by Tim LaTulippe, Managing Director, and Dom Tucker, Associate Director, both from iDS's London office. We're here today to talk about global data privacy laws, what legal professionals need to know. Welcome, Dom and Tim.
Hello.
Hello.
Or I should have said Tim and Dom. I don't know. We can fight about that later when I'm in London. We'll see who wins after a couple of pints. I'm really excited about today's topic. I always find it interesting how the U.S. views data privacy and the rest of the world. I think, Tim, recently I heard you say something along the lines of, if Americans can get it for free and they have to give up data, who cares? Just give me what I can get for free. Whereas Europe, that may not be the same. So maybe we'll hear a little bit more about that as we throw out some questions, or maybe I misheard it from you, but regardless, let's jump in. Fair warning in advance, gents. While I say, here's the next question, a lot of these I think are going to end up being two-parters. So, I may tell you it's going to be 5 questions. It's probably more. And I don't care which of you takes this first one, but what are, in your mind or minds, the most significant global data privacy regulations currently in force, and how do they differ from one another? Now, sorry, disclaimer to our listeners. We are not dispensing legal advice. We are not engaging in the practice of law. This is based on our best practices, our experience working with clients. So maybe I should restate the question. Most significant global data privacy regs currently in force, and how do they differ from one another?
I'll take that. Thank you. And I'll thank you not to quote me out of context, Jonathan. So we'll address that after. Don't worry.
Fair.
Unsurprisingly, the most probably prominent set of data protection regulations would be the GDPR in continental Europe. This is something that came into effect in May of 2018. It was a huge uplift from an existing directive, and I'm not going to get into the legalese of a directive versus a regulation, but effectively it added the enhanced protection of personal data by controllers and processors of their information. So all the 170 million people that live in Europe have these enshrined sort of rights to have their data protected. This GDPR regulation maintains that those rights are, yes, protected, but it also does so by instituting an enforcement regime that was a lot more robust than those previously in place. So large-scale percentages of global turnover for multinationals, these kinds of things. And it's no longer folklore or myth. Some very large companies have been hit with some eye-watering sort of 8-figure fines in this respect. Your other question is, how does it stack up to some of the other more prominent data protection regimes in the world?
Right.
I don't really have a good answer for that. I'm not a data protection specialist. We deal with it in the way that we do in a specific context. Will probably come out in our conversation. But it's a fun inflection point to mention the fact that the UK, Britain, has its own UK GDPR, which isn't just to be spiteful or silly following Brexit, but it's basically word for word the same law. The UK were principal authors of the GDPR at its drafting and inception, so it was more or less a copy and paste to enshrine it into British law uniquely.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. I think that we're starting to see some US states use that as a model, probably remove some S's and add Z's, or add Z's and removes S's, and remove some U's. But basically, California, I think, led the charge here in the US with trying to establish some similar data privacy protections. All right. So the next question that I have is, these recent technological advancements that we have, such as AI or the Internet of Things, which is not necessarily as new, but these tech advancements, how are they impacting global data privacy laws?
Wow. Yeah, actually, Dom, you'll probably have some good insight on that. I would probably start by saying the EU, again, turning towards the 27 countries that make up this United States of Europe, if you like, they've legislated the EU Act, and a draft of it leaked before its proper enactment.
Oh.
And it's a hefty read. I would need AI just to read it and summarize it to me. Obviously, I've read maybe 2 pages out of however many it is, but it's very interesting because they're taking a very progressive, forward approach to try to regulate something that hasn't really been well developed and hasn't. You almost sort of need to let it grow and make mistakes before you then rein it back in and regulate it. That's probably how it should organically happen. I'm for the protection and the regulation, as on a personal note, but it seems premature to try to regulate it. But I don't think that's what's happening in reality. I think it's legislated as a framework more than anything. I'll shift over to Dom because I know he's more of an AI enthusiast than I am, perhaps. But there's this sort of aggregation of data issue that I think comes up here, or as an interplay.
Yeah, I think with AI, what we're dealing with is this contention with the GDPR, where we kind of brought the horses back into the stable and we tried to get data under control, and people understood their rights and how they were managed, and people got their houses in order, only had the data that they needed to have. And now AI really wants as much data as possible, is potentially part of it. And so really, we're starting to see this pressure that perhaps the horses are going to bolt again. There's an encouragement really for people to start to collate data, for the AI systems to work on it. And I think that's really the new compliance and regulatory challenge there. But as Tim says, we don't really know what the technology is yet. So it's sort of a chicken and egg dynamic.
Thoughts on this piece. So when I drafted this question, the Internet of Things thing stuck with me a little bit. The notion that perhaps we as individuals are doing things that create data that it is different than an email or a text message. I'm consciously creating the email or text message. I have a device that is tracking activity or information arguably about me that's being stored somewhere. Does the same level of protection apply to data that is created by me doing something, not necessarily what is being consciously created by my fingers on a keyboard, whether it's an actual keyboard or my phone?
I like your question. It's actually pretty cool because I might reword it slightly just for myself.
To make it cooler. To make it cooler. That's fair.
Yeah,
go ahead. Yeah.
To make it much cooler.
Yeah.
But if you were to reframe that and say, I guess maybe sorry for the back and forth, but maybe you mean, is there a difference between data that are created by human prose, like things that a human, like authors? Is that what you're asking?
You know what? For purposes of this, yes. Is there a difference? Should there be a difference between data that is prose created by a user versus the activity of a user?
The law makes no such distinction. Any data that personally identifies any living person. So if you walked into a healthcare clinic or something, an A&E, Dom busted his leg windsurfing or whatever he's doing.
He's a maniac. He's a maniac. We know that.
He goes into A&E, and they have a tablet in there, and he pulls up his NHS number, and all this information creates a record about his visit: name, age, height, weight, birth, health issues, whatever. He's not actually done anything except kind of check in to the hospital, but that data enjoys equal protection to his emails or his text messages or anything else. I think the system that creates it and the type of content is sort of irrelevant in that respect.
So the
Dom,
same.
unless Dom disagrees in some way, but that's probably if you look at an iceberg, the bit that sticks up out of the water is the smallest bit. I'd say the largest bit of data are these just insanely frequently created data records all over the world via IoT and other things that are just information about people and events that do identify individuals, but aren't the emails and documents and contemporaneous types of data that we deal with.
In thinking about it, and Tim, for those listeners that don't know, that you occasionally will ride a bike, and you probably have a device like an iPhone on you, it's potentially creating data related to you. It's information about you. But it ties to you. It's on your device. I'm sure there is a field of information that captures that it's your device. Maybe now, it could have been that your daughter has snuck out of the house with your phone and is riding a bike, but that's a little far-fetched. But the overall notion is that while it's not it's not prose, it is still information that ties back to you, which arguably is PII in some form or fashion. Dom, any thoughts on that one, or are you in agreement with Tim?
I think it's a good example that, the data being collated about Tim cycling around the city, it's not just his phone collating that data. If Tim's renting one of the electric bikes like he does, picks it up near his house, cycles it to the office, then there's a third party there is collating information about Tim's daily movements. They know how quickly he cycled across the city. They know potentially where he stopped for his coffee. They know where he works. I think it's absolutely right that type of personal information is protected.
Wow. And then to completely open Pandora's box, then there's all the CCTV that's out there.
London's the most surveilled city in the world outside of Beijing.
And we're not just talking government surveillance. You've got individuals who have their own cameras that are out there. Now, the individuals there won't know that it's Tim, but there is now data in which Tim is there.
Yeah.
If somebody has the ability to use facial recognition, now they can actually determine, is it P? All right, that's a whole subject for another podcast, but
it's a fun one.
Yeah. No. Yeah, of course. Well, any podcast with me is a fun one, Tim. Come on. All right. Next question. What are some of the key challenges, but also the opportunities that exist for businesses operating in a globalized world with these diverse data privacy laws?
I think the obvious challenge is the compliance challenge. As we've acknowledged, there's a patchwork of regulations, GDPR, and other jurisdictions, Brazil, California, Asia, China. The challenge is, if you're operating globally, is to really come to understand the nuances of all of these regimes and intertwine them into how you're operating globally. But the real challenge there is that it has to go beyond the desk of the compliance officer. There's a real risk that if you think that employing a compliance officer with a nice desk in the corner, that's going to solve the problem, then it's not. It has to go further, and it has to really embed within the culture of the organization. People need to be cognizant of data rights, how they're protected in different places. But it goes beyond the people as well. It has to go to the process. Unless the people in the process are aligned in protecting that data, then really you're not going to achieve that compliance.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dom. Particularly the nuance piece. So Tim, you had mentioned that Great Britain's GDPR is similar to the EU. I think we said copy and paste, but that is not the case. Dom's highlighted other jurisdictions. There could be similar, but really understanding the nuance, which is why I think it's critical to work with organizations, law firms, companies like ours, where there's an understanding of what the nuance may be, so that it all parties who are involved in the collection and processing of the data know what compliance looks like. So we talked that we just used the word compliance. So it feeds right into the next question, which is, what are the potential consequences of non-compliance with some of these data privacy laws, and how do companies actually mitigate that risk?
I think the first one that everyone will leap upon is the fines. And GDPR is very well known for the 4% of global turnover. So up front, there's a threat of a real penalty there if you're not going to comply with data protection laws. But really, it goes beyond this. Reputational damage. I think if you're a company that's managing data of customers, whoever else, and if you fail to deal with that properly, then there's a risk there that you're going to lose your customers' trust and loyalty. Why should they bring their data back to you if you don't know how to deal with it properly? Beyond that, if you've been the subject of a breach, then obviously there's the risk of kind of follow-on legal actions, people trying to seek some redress because you failed to deal with data protection laws properly. And also operational disruption. If you were the subject of a breach, then, how do you handle it? Potentially, there's a risk there that you have to stop operating, take a step back, come to understand how the breach happened and what needs to take place to sort of restore the status quo and protect against an ongoing breach. So really, it's a real mesh, and there's a risk in being distracted that it'll just be a fine at the end of the day. It's far more complex than that.
Yeah, Tom, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think far too often when we think about data protection, it's the right that I have to my data. And it's I don't want you to have it. I am rejecting your cookies. I want, whatever. It's different when it's that the breach situation where it's not. It's less voluntary. Somebody has come in and taken information from the company, and now they have to handle it because what was taken was also PII. So I think that your comment helps highlight that this is not just a matter of an individual trying to protect proactively their information, but how companies have to face it when the company themselves are in a reactive posture. So let me move on to what is probably our last question, because I know that both of you are very busy. How can individuals, right? We've been talking about kind of how can companies respond. I want to focus now on the individuals. How can individuals protect their own personal data in the digital age? And as promised, two-parter, what steps can they take to exercise their rights under data privacy laws?
Ooh, I'll take that one. That one's pretty fun. Because I do it a lot personally, so I think I think it's beneficial for me to share my experience. Maybe some of the larger perpetrators of mass data aggregation and sort of exploitation are also the ones that are providing some solution. So Apple, a really good example. They have a whole ad campaign on Apple is privacy or whatever it says on the side of the underground or the buses. They have a very big campaign on security and privacy. Whether that's a bit two-faced is another question, but they do have some pretty neat tools and anonymization add-ins to iPhone, iOS, Mac OS. If you wanted to buy something and use Apple Pay, for instance, if you wanted to buy dinner from a place and go pick it up yourself, like a food takeout or something, you don't have to log in with your Apple ID, your Gmail account. You don't have to feed all the data to these people. Apple will now let you give them a one-use anonymized email address that comes back to your mail address, but the recipient will never see it. A data broker will never see it. They'll never know it's you. It won't have your name on it. So it's a way for you to do the transaction and do it in the efficient sort of button pushing way, but without compromising your own data privacy. There are other third parties that do this stuff. It's really cool. That's probably my number one for individuals is you can still enjoy these things. You don't have to live in the woods with no mobile phone and a bunch of compasses and, you don't have to live completely off grid. You can play their game a little bit. You can make an email address that you only use to buy products. I used to do that, have separate sort of accounts for different things. I'm a bit lazier now, but you can do that. You can also use some pretty cool third-party services. There's one called Incogni, which I don't endorse in any official way. They're not paying me. I wish they were, but they're not. It's pretty cheap. I mean, we're talking like a few pound a month kind of thing tops. But they basically, you give them your primary email address, maybe a few other data points, and they just automatically in the background in perpetuity go and pluck all your stuff away from data brokerage warehouses in America and around the world. And they file the, not dissimilar to subject access requests, but they lodge these complaints and have your data torn out of these systems. And they kind of clean up your online profile in quotes, if you like. And so that's a thing people can do as well. It's completely accessible and affordable, and it seems to have good results for people.
Interesting. Real quick, because you mentioned what we've referred to as DSARs, but we may have some U.S. listeners who are unfamiliar with what that acronym stands for. So could you just spend a minute explaining that?
Sure. Yeah, it's a data subject access request. So you're the data subject, you're a European resident or maybe resident California in America, and you would file a request to the controller of the data. So if it was a healthcare provider or a hospital or something where you were a patient, you could file that request to them and say, pursuant to my rights, I'm requesting the following types of information that you hold on me. Not dissimilar to a discovery order request type request for production of documents, way less specific, no like specifications, or very open-ended, which actually makes it quite onerous because you really are kind of obligated to make best efforts to go and get it and produce it and that sort of thing. Often used by people as a weaponized thing. I don't know what percentage of the time, but some people say, well, I don't like this company very much, I'm going to annoy them. So it can kind of happen both ways, but it also falls into this similar area, which isn't really part of a DSAR, but it's this right to erasure, which is a key part of the GDPR and related regulations, which is you have the right to ask your data to be purged from those environments. They can't keep it in perpetuity. If you ask them to get rid of it, they're bound to do that. They might not have to do it in 30 seconds, but they are supposed to do that. Dom, more than anybody's worked on an enormous volume of DSARs. He might want to add something to that.
Yeah, DSARs is the tool by which someone can hold the organization accountable for holding their personal data. Really, it's how you knock on the door and ask someone, what personal information have you got of mine? And there's a tight time limit on the request for them to, come to the door and show you exactly what they hold on you in a nice format as well.
Interesting. Well, I think we're at time. So let me actually, before I thank the two of you, let me congratulate the two of you. Earlier this year, iDS Limited, our European London-based division, was ranked in Chambers and Partners band 4, which after just 4 years of existence is friggin' awesome. So congratulations to you and to our other colleagues over there in London. Really impressive. So I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to congratulate you. So congratulations. Plus 1 pint. Plus, you know what? Plus 4 pints. That's what I say. Tim, Dom, thank you for joining me today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I love the fact that we're now going to have a follow-on podcast. I think that one will be really interesting. I'd also like to thank our regular subscribers and those that may be first-time listeners for spending time with us today as well. If you'd like to learn more about IDS or want to subscribe to our IDS Talks podcast, you can visit idsinc.com or go wherever you normally get your podcasts from. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to talking more about data with you in our next edition of IDS Talks.